Welcome to Azure Mythbusters, and today's myth is that it's hard to get started with Azure DevOps. I'm April Edwards, I'm a senior software engineer with Microsoft, and I'm here to walk you through how to get started with Azure DevOps. So why Azure DevOps? Maybe as an organization you made a decision to embrace this tool, or you're asked to explore it by your team. Don't know, but let's talk about why it's useful and why it's really good. And actually, it's a lot easier to get started on than you may think. So let's start with the basics. Why Azure DevOps? First of all, it's any code, any platform. Azure DevOps can deploy to any cloud, on-premise, and you can bring any code to our tooling. So it's not just meant for Windows developers, .NET, it is meant for everything, open source, multi-cloud, and your on-premise environment. So let's start there. It's a tool that can handle everything. So it's broken up into different components. One thing it's really great for is delivering CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and it does that with automation. You can deliver automated code for your infrastructure, so things like infrastructure as code, using third-party tools like Terraform or deploying with ARM templates into Azure. Or you can look at automating your actual code with your developers, like your .NET, etc. It automates that through our Azure pipelines built into the tool. Another component is that it tracks changes. So a lot of customers come to us and when they're deploying infrastructure or code, they don't have any versioning in place. So we can track changes with versioning and pull that into our pipelines and know exactly what's changing when and have full record of how that happens into our environments. Another thing Azure DevOps can do is can manage projects and tasks. It's great for project managers to know what tasks and what is being assigned to each person and when they get completed as well. You can see when tasks are in progress or completed and done, or maybe there's a blocker. It can all be tracked within this tool. You can track what your team's doing. You can set up Kanban boards. There's so much leverage you can do with these tools that you can track your projects from beginning to end. It's not just going to deploy everything with automation. It does all that for your project as well. In Azure DevOps, you can also maintain your source code. So you can host it in Azure Repos, which hosts it more locally in the cloud, but as like a local distribution, or you can go into a centrally distributed model, things like GitHub or Bitbucket. So you can bring your code from the existing source that you have today into Azure DevOps. So let's get started. We can go net new, greenfield environment, and build everything from scratch. Okay, I have a better idea. I'm going to show you a shortcut using Azure DevOps projects. All right, so let's get started. Log into your portal, go into the marketplace, and type in DevOps projects. So once we do that, we're given a screen here, and I want to add a project. Okay, pretty simple. Now, we're going to start with a fresh new application today, but you can bring your own code. So if we scroll down a little bit, you can see bring your own code for an existing application. What I'm going to do today is I want to actually start with a new one. But if you are a developer and say, you know what, I want to bring my code. I don't know, coding in Go, Ruby, Python, Java, whatever you want, bring it with you. We take it in Azure. We're an open platform. But for today's sake, I'm just going to keep it as a .NET website, really simple. And actually, I'm going to use .NET Core. And if you notice here, I have an option to add a database. Most applications have a database dependency every single time. So I can select that and add a SQL database. Now, let's say you have a different database requirement like Mongo. That's fine. You can add it secondarily. You don't have to add it at the same time. This will just deploy it at the same time with your website. So I'm going to deploy an ASP.NET Core website. I'm going to select Next. Now I have more options here. So I have a website, and I don't have to just deploy it into a virtual machine. I can go into an Azure web app. I can go into a function app. I can go into Kubernetes and containerize my app right off the bat from a greenfield site. Great. I'm actually just deploy this into a Windows web app today, and I'm going to select that and hit Next. Now that we've chosen where we're going to put our website into an Azure web app, I need to name it. So I need to name my project. Now the project name just needs to not conflict with anything you already have built in Azure DevOps. So I'm just going to call this one Application Demo, really simple. Now I have to choose my Azure DevOps organization in which to tie this to. If you don't already have an Azure DevOps organization, you can create one. Now I'm going to use an existing one, and then you also need to choose your subscription in which to deploy to. And then we also need to name our web app. I've called it Application Demo. I'm going to call it Best Website Ever. And what it does, it will check against the references for any of the Azure websites. So it doesn't have any conflicts, great. So be sure to check the location where your web app is deploying to, and especially if you have a database, you want to make sure they're in the exact same location. That catches a lot of people out. So I also want to hit additional settings here. I don't want to just click Done because it will configure some things for me, and I want to make sure I have that input to get it correctly deployed. So it does ask me here at the top, first thing, DevOps project. Do you want to create a new DevOps organization? I don't, because I want to use an existing one. And for this web app on Windows, I can use a resource group name. So I can create my own resource group, and this will be net new, or I can deploy into an existing one. The other thing I need to do is choose the size of my web app. So web apps come in t-shirt sizes, and basically just buying the compute behind it. For this web app, 1 core, 1.75 gigs of RAM, absolutely fine. And again, it gives me the option to deploy application insights so I can monitor my app going forward, and it's already there by default. So this is the gotcha here. Make sure your application insights is deployed to the same region as your web app. So I'm happy with all my settings. I hit OK, and we go on to the next bit. So I'm absolutely happy with my settings. I'm happy with my naming convention, and I'm going to hit done. So what happens from here is that Azure DevOps Project will start deploying this for us. So once we've deployed our solution in Azure DevOps Projects, it will tell us your deployment is complete. And I can sit here and go to resource. Awesome. So I'll pull up a new screen, and the next screen that appears is really great. It's a CI/CD pipeline creation for us, and it shows us when the Azure resources are created. So what it's done is it's already putting all of our code in our brand new, net new Greenfield app into a CI/CD pipeline in Azure DevOps. So now our app is deploying. When we get to this page, we can see our CI/CD pipeline. Now, if I click on here, it actually sends me to the master branch where our code is deposited already for us. So by clicking on that, I can see that we have our application code and ARM templates. So what Azure DevOps Project does, it actually creates the ARM template for what you've deployed successfully, so we can reference it later or redeploy it. So we have working JSON templates moving forward. The other thing this does is I can actually click on it, and I can see that there's a build in progress. And if I sit here and say, okay, we got a build number, and we have a version, exactly what we want, click on that, and I can actually see our build proceeding. Fantastic. So we've used Azure DevOps Projects to deploy our code to a repo and start a whole build and release pipeline. So our website has been fully deployed. If I look back into the portal here, I can see that the code is in its place, in its repo. We have a full build and release pipeline, and those green tick boxes mean it's done. I also have an application endpoint. So if I click on that, it actually takes me to our website. Hello, Azure Mythbusters. There we go. So we have a working website. We also can navigate to the application service. It shows that it's running, and we can start making changes to our code. So we do have a website up and running. It's nothing fancy, but hey, we have Azure Mythbusters. So let's make some changes, and let's see how this actually works and what really has been deployed. So actually, if I click on my source code here, it takes me straight to the repo in Azure DevOps. So again, like I showed you before, we do have a working JSON template. We have a full ARM template of what infrastructure we've actually deployed. So if we were deploying this into a Kubernetes cluster or a Windows virtual machine or another web app, doesn't matter. We have repeatable code. We have repeatable infrastructure as code. We've achieved that step, which is fantastic. And if I go into the actual application code itself, I can make edits of my code within Azure DevOps. Now, I want to use an IDE. While this is great, and I can see code and everything else, I actually want to make some edits. Maybe I want to just check that back into our repo. Fine. We have a great feature here where we can hit clone. So if I hit clone here, I have the option to take an SSH or HTTPS line and generate Git credentials, whatever we need to do to get our code. Actually, I want to make this really simple. I want to go into my IDE of choice, which for me is going to be VS Code. Now, if you do prefer to work in other IDEs, if you hit the drop-down box there are other options. But if I select clone in VS Code, it will do that, and it'll open up VS Code for me. Now that we've cloned our code, I have it open in my preferred IDE, VS Code. So let's make some changes. So as we saw in Azure DevOps, we had our Azure repo. I've cloned that into VS Code, and I can go and navigate to the code and make some changes. So let's see what happens. So let's make some changes to our code, and it affects how our pipeline reacts. So I have hello Azure Mythbusters. Now I'm going to write happy Friday, because here in the UK, it's Friday. So I'm going to make some changes to my code. I'm going to save it. And I'm going to commit those changes. And I am going to put a little bit of a message to my commit so that I can track it. And you will see in Azure DevOps that commit message will translate into Azure DevOps. So there can be tracking of every change made and every version change in your code. So I'm just going to put that we did an index change. I'm going to hit commit. And you can also do this via the terminal. But then I'm also going to make my push request. So my push request go through. We can see everything spinning at the bottom. And what it's going to do is going to commit my code into the repo in Azure DevOps. Now that we've checked our code into VS Code and we've done our push request, we can see that it's actually propagated to our Azure repo. If we look here, we can see Happy Friday. It's propagated across properly. So what happens? So after that code has been checked in again, it actually kicks off a build. So when we use Azure DevOps projects, it sets up a build process for us. So we can see it's kicked off a build and everything succeeded. And if we go into our release pipeline, it goes into a release. So we can see that our build pipeline has completed successfully. We have a green tick mark, we have a build number, and we have a version number against it. So if I go into my release pipeline, I can see that it is also released properly as well. So it's done an automatic build and release based on my code change once it's been checked in. There we go, and it's succeeded. So if I go into my website here and I just refresh, there we go. Happy Friday, Azure Mythbusters. So let's go over what we've done. We've gone into the Azure portal. We have started a new DevOps project. We've deployed a web app with no code, greenfield site, made some changes to our code, and it's done a full build and release pipeline. So there we go. We have used Azure DevOps, greenfield code, or we can bring our own code and get a full build and release pipeline working and using Azure repos.